listener to the Campfire Cult Podcast. From a camper van deep in the haunted woods, I bring you first-hand accounts of chilling encounters with the paranormal. Step into the night and take a peek into the realm where reality and the supernatural collide. My name is Jazz, and I'll be your host. Real quick, I wanted to say welcome to all the new subscribers and a quick thank you for all the continued support of everyone that has been with me from the very beginning. We have this one last episode before a short 6-week break due to some travel plans and new episode development. With that said, some big things are coming your way. I'm going to start offering Patreon-only content in the form of extended episodes, bonus Patreon-only full episodes, as well as, special merch discounts, stickers, patches, and some other fun things I've got in the works. I'd also love to start doing some live broadcasting on YouTube. I think that'd be really fun. So here are the details for the Patreon membership. The cost will be $5 per month. Upon joining, I'll be sending you a few stickers as a thank you, so please make sure to include your mailing address with your membership sign up. Along with the stickers, you'll also have access to 2 Patreon-only episodes that will be airing during my 6-week break. Your Patreon membership will go a long way to help me find and pay someone to help with story curation. It's a lot of fun exploring the world of the weird, but I could really use some help making this a weekly podcast with fewer breaks in the schedule. You can become a Campfire Cult member at patreon.com/campfirecultpod. Anyway, enough of all this pre-ramble. Let's get into the episode. We're going to be kicking things off tonight at the border of upstate New York, near the location of the notorious Whitehall Bigfoot sightings.
My partner and I live on the border of upstate New York, not far from the Whitehall Bigfoot sighting. One night, my partner was taking out the garbage. When he came back inside, he looked shook up. I mean, really shook up. They said they had seen a creature that looked like maybe a fox or coyote, but that it stood up on its hind legs and they booked it back inside. Fast forward about a month and I'm outside on my porch, enjoying the stars under a crystal clear sky. We have a small plot next to our house that has a tow-behind landscaping trailer permanently parked on it about 20-ish feet away from the house. After a while of standing outside, I get the sudden and intense feeling like something is watching me. Just that primal feeling of danger. It should be noted that, like most people up here, I'm usually carrying a gun on me. Coyotes and bears are fairly common up here, so I kind of do the four corners check of my surroundings. When I looked over to that trailer, I saw there was something the size of a large dog laying in the grass. Mind you, it's a clear night with a not quite full moon, and the grass was uncut, long, but not like a meadow. If I had to estimate, I'd say around 7 to 9 inches high, so I had a really good view of this thing. Now I know never to approach a random animal bedded down at night, so I just kind of watch it for a second. Even in the light of the moon, its outline and coat were pitch black, blacker than anything I've seen before, unnaturally contrasting against the ground it laid on. Then it looks up, it has piercing red eyes. I'm thinking, what the fuck, and put my hand on my revolver. And then it stood up, it fucking stood up on its hind legs. The only way I can describe the legs of it is like that goat-human hybrid from the Narnia movie, but with the torso like a hybrid of man and canine. It was taller than me, and I'm 6'1". It didn't even need to take a step. I backed away to the door, locked and bolted it, and spent the rest of the night wondering what I just saw. Now I'll admit I'm a religious man, but that thing didn't fit the description of any jinn I've heard of. It's to this day one of the few things in my life I cannot explain. We've installed security cameras since, but now the lot is under construction, and we haven't seen it since. I don't know what I saw that night truly, but I intend to find out one way or another.
Next, in the rugged beauty of the Pacific Northwest, an experienced hiker finds herself stalked by an unseen menace.
I was out on the coast in the Pacific Northwest. You drive west through the mountains, hit the coast, and Highway 101 running north and south has just the most gorgeous collection of habitats. You can be on sea cliffs or near tidal pools, or in the coastal pines with ferns the size of small cars, or areas that get swallowed up by the Pacific that have little microbiomes inside the felled trees, and you can see the natural battle for high ground. areas in which ferns and fungi are more prevalent than any animal, emerald groves dotted with little amanita mushrooms, these little rubies and gold nuggets standing out against the reddish-brown pine needles. For the most part out here, you're safe. Being keenly aware of your surroundings should keep you from disappearing, and using a walking stick will save you a broken leg or a fall, all of which are very real dangers. There's big cats and bear and elk and moose, but so long as you're not stupid and you stay aware, you're going to be okay. But every now and then, a new large cat warning sign goes up for a few weeks, a new no poaching sign appears for a while, etc. If you travel through enough of it, you'll find the meth labs and hobo huts, and those really are the most dangerous animals you're going to run into. It's early in the season and I'm on this little spit, which by December is just getting nailed by waves and disappears in the storms. Part of it was engineered for this, and the main path has little hills on the left and right sides, so the whole path is effectively a massive game trail that's always the first thing to flood. The wildlife in the area hang out at the very open-end area at the sea, and every now and again, a cat will chase a deer up and make a kill, then drag it off to the sides. You'll sometimes see marks of struggle, but more often just remains off-path. The sea and I are very familiar with each other here. But just this one night, man, it was getting dark and I'm at the open wildlife area thinking how I gotta get back to the car. I checked my flashlights, but I had burned through them 12 to 16 hours earlier in the pre-dawn hours. I check the comforting rhythmic lights of 2 landmarks and triangulate where I'm at and tuck that away. I put the lights away and figure if I can't find my way back in the dark, then I don't belong out there at this hour ever again. I'm slowly walking back, keeping a steady and committed pace but not running or making myself a prey target. But something just wasn't right. I text my partner and let them know I'm okay, just a little freaked out, but I'll be back at my car when signal returns in 60 minutes. The faint glow of my cell was the last light I'd see. Something was wrong. I felt like I was being followed, but thought my nerves got the better of me. I heard some snapping twigs and rustling and all the wildlife waking up or going to sleep. All of it was normal, until it wasn't. I thought I'd heard whispers, but knew it was just the whispers of the wind over the water and splash on the rocks and animals going to sleep. I reach for my phone and realize I'd have no signal and it would just give away my position, so I get back to it double time. I get maybe 20 feet and there it is again. I didn't see any bear or elk or anything, and if it was a large cat, I'd never hear it or see it coming. If it was a deer, it'd be stumbly-bumbly loud. I hear a snap, actually more like a thock. And this was no tiny twig, so whatever it wasn't small. I keep thinking, it's a person. It's a person. Someone has seen me out here and either wants my gear and cash or to kill me. I make it in the final half-mile stretch, and by now I'm sure I would have been attacked if it was an animal. I see the faint, not natural parking lot in the scant moonlight, and could hit it with my light if it worked. I spin around thinking, fuck it. I can bolt because it's definitely a person or people, and I'm better off defending myself than I am just being attacked. I break out my phone and shine it down this looming corridor of coast, the trees flanking the path, hugging the light and kind of holding it in. Nothing. I let out a sigh of relief. Snap. Again, but behind me now. So whatever it was made its way around me. It's close. A deer takes off in the sedge and I hear more and more snaps and shuffling and branches catching on jackets, and it hits me and I put 2 and 2 together. They're trying to get me before I can get to the car. This goes through my head and I worry it's the last thought I'll ever have. I move off the path one would anticipate and try to skirt around the whole situation. Because hey, maybe it's still just me freaking out. I cut through the sedge and wild berries and get some distance and cut back through to the main trailhead parking lot. I had seen no people all day, which was odd because there's half a dozen cars, and I would have seen one of them. I get to the car and fumble my keys and get in, fire the thing up before my ass hits the seat and rip it the fuck out of there. Behind me, in the light cast by the small restrooms and soft moonlight, are 7 or 8 men. Some are still running at the car but slowing down as I put distance between us. I saw the faint, soft, silvery glint of blades in some of their hands and one machete, and the rest had sticks or other blunt-type objects. I don't know what the fuck they wanted, but they wanted it really bad. I've been hiking there for years and will not be going back.
Coming up, a college student recounts the eerie encounter his brother had with an unsettling presence that lurked in their childhood home.
My twin brother and I were in college when my younger brother was a junior in high school, and he was the only child left on one end of the house. We live out in the country in the middle of nowhere. Nothing but farmland wherever you look. Our house was a standard, long, rectangular house with our parents' master suite on one end and our bedrooms on the completely opposite end. Between these ends were open-concept kitchen, dining, and living room spaces. You could look from one end of the house and see all the way to the other end if both bedrooms on each end were open. My brother, a big guy, 6'4" and 250 pounds, was getting home from football practice around 5 p.m. and said he was the only one home at the time. Our mom is a school teacher, and our dad farms and works in town as well. Our parents were still at work at the time he got home. He came into the house in the back door and was walking through the living room to head to his bedroom. His bedroom was the room at the end of our hallway, completely opposite from our parents' master suite. Maybe, if I do a good job describing our end of the house, I can help explain what happens later. Right as you are leaving the living room to enter our hallway and bedrooms, there are 4 doors. First door on the right was my bedroom, and completely opposite my bedroom is our shared bathroom for us 3 boys. As you walk down the hallway, the second door on your left is my twin brother's room, and my younger brother has his room at the end of the hallway. My younger brother's room has a small area you walk in, then you immediately walk to your right to enter the main part of his bedroom. So if his bedroom door is open, all you see, if you are in the hallway, is a small entrance facing a wall with light coming in from the open bedroom space on the right. I hope I've painted a picture for you. Now back to the story. As my brother is walking through the living room and about to enter the hallway, he looks down the hallway to his open bedroom door. He explained that he didn't know why, but he had the deepest pit in his stomach and felt every single hair on his arms stand on end. Something felt wrong to him, and he froze as he entered the hallway. Once he got into the hallway and was looking at his bedroom door, he said he saw something beginning to peer around the doorway. He knew exactly what it was, and the only way he could describe it was, "It looked like I was peering around the door frame looking right at me." He instantly got the sensation that he shouldn't be seeing this, so he immediately bolted to the left for our bathroom and slammed the door. He said he held his back up against the door and immediately heard someone running down our hallway, past the bathroom into our living room. The worst part was when he could hear him slowly walking back to the bathroom door and just stood there, unmoving. We get absolutely terrible cell reception where we live, so he tried calling our parents but couldn't get a hold of either of them. He stayed in our bathroom with his back up against the door for about an hour until our mom made it home. He says until she got there, he could tell someone was on the other side of that door. When he told us about this story, we just laughed and said, maybe it was your doppelganger coming to get you, and he absolutely believes it was something like that. He was so scared during the moment, he said he just knew he wasn't supposed to see what came out of his bedroom. He's still scared to stay alone at that end of the house, even though he's 27 now.
Next up, in northern Canada, a man recounts a chilling encounter with a grotesque, otherworldly creature on a secluded road.
First, yes, I have done drugs and a number of hallucinogens in my life, but I was 100% clean for months when this happened, so I know what I saw. I used to live in northern Canada, not crazy high up like in the territories, but far enough north that it's snowy 7 or 8 months out of the year. It's a small city surrounded on all sides by huge forests with bears, cougars, wolves, coyotes, moose, all that great white north stuff. And I've come across a lot of bears and moose living at the bottom of a hill that's the edge of a forest. At least half a dozen bears every summer, and a moose once or twice a year. I happen to go out on late-night walks frequently on my road, which is pretty secluded. Just a straight road, forest on one side and flat land on the other with street lamps every couple hundred feet. One night I saw something that seemed wrong. I swear on the life of my dead best friend that this is what I remember. I'm walking back home about 2, maybe 3 a.m. in the morning in mid-July on my road. Couple clicks from home, but I've walked this way a couple dozen times. I've been followed by bears, but they fuck off as soon as a truck rolls around every couple of minutes. I carry bear mace, so not too worried. I'm walking back home, and on the flat land next to me, which is about half a click wide and long, I see this yellow eye in the opening. Just one eye. It's just sitting there with this pear-shaped black body. Looked like a black bear loafing around. It's maybe 300 or 400 feet away, and the streetlight was in my eyes the first time I saw it. I keep walking forward, but I know to keep my eye out for it, so I reach for my bear mace as a precaution. I turn my head and the fucking thing starts moving, but not like a bear, or a moose, or a cougar, or timber wolf, or anything I've ever seen before. It's silhouetted by the moon, so there's enough faint light to sort of light up the opening field once I was out of the street lamp and my eyes could adjust. I must have made 4 checks to make sure I was really seeing this thing right. It was hunched over and standing like a man, but moved almost like an ape. This thing's torso and limbs were so bizarre. They were narrow, but it looked like it was covered in a torn blanket or something. When it started to move, its limbs seemed to stretch out way more than they should. The arms looked the length of its fucking upper body. At this point, I feel the ice shoot up my spine, and everything is slowing down. My mind is racing, and I start walking faster, never breaking eye contact with this thing. It starts to move the same way as I am, slowly turning towards the road. Now at this point, if you live up north, you know a bear can outrun you, so you best stay where you are and let the thing go about its business, and they will just leave you alone. I stop, it stops, I don't move, I don't lift a finger. I stand in the darkness between the streetlights, watching the silhouette with yellow eyes sitting there. A minute or more must have passed. Time felt like it was standing still. I was so terrified. I'm holding my breath, just waiting for this thing to leave. God, I wish it did. As I stand there thinking of what I should do, looking both ways for any sign of a car, with nobody in sight, I look back to the thing in the field. It starts moving forward again, but now it's making a sharp turn to the road. It keeps doing this bizarre movement pattern, again as I can only describe as an ape with narrow limbs, and keeps its pace. It starts shambling towards the road, now only 100 feet ahead of me. It's walking directly towards a streetlight, moving about as fast as someone walking with no purpose would. Maybe I scared it before when I walked faster. As it got closer, I was feeling relieved. I knew what it was. Of course, dumbass me scaring the shit out of myself over a fucking bear I've probably seen 3 times that year. Fucker probably smelled food in someone's trash. I wish to God that was what I saw, but this thing shouldn't exist. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I swear on my best friend's life it looked like a starved bear with legs much too long. Its fur was torn and hanging loose off its body. Its face was caved in, and the flesh was falling off its left side. It crawled across the concrete like a sickly ape who was suffering. And then I heard its cry. It haunts me every time I think of it. Somewhere between a growl and a groan inside a metal can. I've never heard anything like it. As it crawled, its back left leg was completely loose from its body. Still attached, but it wasn't moving with everything. Pure dead weight. All bone at this point. I'm close to pissing my pants and I try to scream, but my throat tenses so much that I can't even breathe. I'm crying to myself as I see this. This couldn't be real, there's no way. It keeps crawling over to the other side of the road into the forest, making rustling sounds as it goes through the brush. As I stand there, staring into the forest, a light comes from behind me, as a pickup truck is coming around the corner down the road half a click. I sprint to that truck, waving my arms, screaming bloody fucking murder for help. The driver sees me, but clearly doesn't want any part of it, and sped right past me. I go running after it, screaming again for help. It gets out of sight, but I keep running and running and running until I get home. Open the door, slam it shut, and fall to the floor sobbing. The only way I can rationalize what I saw was that there was a misshapen bear who was hit by a truck or train and somehow survived the hit and was in its final moments before dying. Its limbs made no sense, half its face was gone, and its movements just twisted and turned all wrong. I have no idea what it was. I told my family and they all said I must have been dreaming or high again. Nobody believed me. I don't even know if I believe what I saw, but I know that I wasn't dreaming. I couldn't have, because my shoes were still covered in dust and dirt from running home. I don't believe in God, or fate, or any of that shit, but I know what I saw was real, and it must have just been a 1 in a billion chance. I've never gone out on a late walk since. That thing was an abomination waiting to die.
Next. In the midst of a seemingly routine camping trip, a group finds themselves entangled in an eerie encounter with a mysterious figure dubbed the Wild Man.
I went on a camping trip with my dad and a couple uncles. My half-sister was along too. We were going to meet up with a bunch of guys and their families from my uncle's military unit. My dad went on ahead of us while we chilled and went at a more sedate pace. My uncles are pretty cool, but they are hardcore campers and survivalists. So they suggested we take a more scenic route through some woods. It was kind of off the planned route, and my sister and I had a lot of fun as my uncles were messing around with walkies and pretending to scout places. Campfires were fun and more relaxed with drinks than when my dad was around, and my uncles told some pretty good stories. Things started getting weird though. My uncles one day stopped joking around and actually started taking proper looks around. They wouldn't tell us why, but I guessed that something had spooked them. My sister is better at the tracking stuff, and she started noticing things weren't right, that someone was following us. Then we started seeing things carved in the trees ahead, meaningless symbols. I confronted my uncles. They told me they had a feeling that we were being watched when they first entered the woods, but kept quiet as there wasn't any evidence. They told me that the evidence they found was off, way too obvious. The man that was watching us could have concealed himself much easier, but he didn't want to. He was trying to make us take a different route, as my uncles would alter course depending on the signs of him being there. I originally thought this might be an elaborate joke, but I saw something in their eyes that changed my mind. Fear. These are hardened vets, and they were scared. That's when we started seeing him, at a distance, through the trees. It was deliberate. My uncles didn't chase him, as they didn't want to leave us alone. They shouted at him, pointed a gun at him. He didn't care, he just stared at us. He looked like a wild man, ragged clothes and a lot of hair. My uncles took turns taking a watch at night. No more jokes. On edge. Gun out. Told us to use our whistles if he got too close and gave us knives if he got really close. It was a really dark night. We were all around the fire, but looking into the trees. And then we heard him speak. His voice haunts me. Why? Because it was strangely normal, completely civil, almost smooth. Not the kind you would expect from, as my uncles called him, the Wild Man. He said,
"Good evening,"
and I nearly pissed myself. The voice was really close. My uncles went quiet as they started looking for where they thought he was. My sister was the first to speak. She said, "Who are you? What do you want?" It was quiet for a while. Then, even closer from a different direction, the man said,
"Interesting questions, but I'm afraid I'm not going to answer them."
I caught a glimpse of him. He was smiling. I shouted and pointed, and my uncle took a shot. He moved away. One of my uncles chased after him with a torch and gun while the other stayed with us. He didn't catch him, and none of us slept that night. We took a different route, coming into a clearing with a largish body of water. He was on the other side. He waved, then disappeared back into the woods. Then we saw what he wanted us to see, a campsite. It was a wreck. It looked trashed, and my uncles reckoned it wasn't more than a few days old. One of the sleeping bags was soaked in blood. The other was ripped like someone had been dragged out of it. There was human hair as well, torn out, with clumps of skin at the ends. It was too much for me and my sister. We found the others a day later, and we called the police and rangers. The two missing were a young newlywed couple really into camping. There was a search. My uncles and their military buddies actually went and searched the woods before the police and rangers even got there. Nobody found anything, just weird things carved into the trees. But the symbols were just gibberish. They literally had no known meaning. My uncles had a new name for him after this experience. They called him the Devil.
Coming up next, We're headed to the mysterious depths of northern Texas, where a man recounts a surreal encounter with what looked like a dogman.
I live in North Texas. I have never told anyone this because I didn't think anyone would believe me, and I think there's a part of me that doesn't want to believe it. This happened somewhere 10 to 15 years ago. I was in college. It was during the winter. My dad has a stock tank. At the time, he had a water pump that irrigated water to other parts of the property. He and my mom were at my sister's basketball game. They were going to be in late, so my dad called and asked me to go turn on the heat lamp in the well house. A cold front was coming in, and he wanted the lights on. For those not familiar with Texas weather, a cold front can drop temps 30+ degrees very quickly. It was already dark. I grabbed a flashlight. My dog has a kennel at the front of the house. The well house is a few hundred yards behind the house. We have a large light on the garage that provides light at night, but not much light past the front of the house. We live next to a busy highway, but it's a very rural area, so there are no street lights or even lights from neighbors. Beyond the comforting circle of the garage light, it's pitch black unless a car goes by, especially that night because it was cloudy, so there was no moonlight, even though it was a full moon. I went out, flashlight in hand, and my dog is whining and doing her excited little bark because she thinks we're going for a walk. I considered leashing her up and taking her with me, but didn't because it was fucking cold and about to get a hell of a lot colder, so I wanted to run out back, turn on the lamp, and run back into the warm house. Now, if you were outside and she was doing the play with me whine, it didn't stop until she saw you go inside or you gave her lovin's. I gave her a quick pet and I went out to the well house. About 200 yards from the house, I noticed I didn't hear her anymore. It was dead silent. No cars. Nothing. I walk the other 100 yards to the well house quickly because it's cold. I'm fidgeting with the lamp just inside the door to get it on. I see headlights cresting the hill above our house. I'm cursing the fucking heat lamp because it isn't coming on. As this car tops the hill, I see something in the ditch move on the opposite side of the road, about 400 to 500 yards away. I didn't really think much of it. Deer run that time of the year, and it was just movement I saw, no particular shape. Other cars are coming, both directions, so their headlights are periodically lighting up the road. I saw some movement in the ditch on our side of the road again, thinking it's deer or something. I finally got the stupid heat lamp to turn on, close the door, and just for fun, shine my light out by the stock tank. God, I wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish I would have just turned around and gone back in. At the back of the tank, I see something moving. It definitely isn't a deer. It looked like it was hobbling and hunched and looked like maybe it was 4 feet tall. It's headed toward a rocky, wooded area at the back of the property. I'm still looking at this weird-ass thing, trying to put it into the appropriate box. Is it a cat, a coyote, a giant raccoon? It isn't fitting into anything I know. My flashlight isn't illuminating it very well. At some point, this thing turns around. It is no longer hunched and went from 4 feet to about 7 feet. I'm frozen in fear at this point. This thing steps, a bit awkwardly. It looked like it lifted its feet really high with each step, into the tank. It's halfway in what has to be cold as hell water, but about 3 feet of its body is sticking up, and it looks like it's gliding across the water. The end of the tank it went in on was 15 feet deep at least. It got halfway across the tank before my brain said, "Run, you fucking idiot!" And I ran faster than I've ever run before. I ran in the house, slammed the door shut, locked it, turned every light on in the house, and hid under a blanket. Prior to that, I had looked out my bedroom window near dusk. This was sometime during elementary school, and I saw what I thought was a dog with super long legs walking near the tank. My parents told me it was probably just a dog that had gotten loose from a neighbor, maybe a Great Dane. But thinking back, that wasn't a fucking Great Dane, and I wonder if it was the same thing I saw that night. Prior to that night, the rocky wooded area behind our house is one place my dog would never go. I would walk her up and around up there, and we would get to a point where she would refuse to go farther. She would whimper and start pulling me back the other way. One time, I dropped the leash, walked into the area trying to show her it was safe. She barked at me, pawed at the ground, cried, yelped, but would not come to me. Obviously, she knew something I didn't. There have also been times my dad has found half-eaten fish around the tank. He thought it was raccoons, but I don't think it was. I've only seen it once since that night, and either it jumped 50 feet into the air or it flew away. I'm not sure. I don't look out at the tank after dark when I'm at my parents' house anymore.
In this next story, we're headed deep into the Angeles National Forest for a terrifying, fog-filled night hike.
I live close to the Angeles National Forest. There are some trails within walking distance from my home that take you up into those mountains. It was a very foggy evening, and having just received some bad news over the phone, I wanted to clear my mind with a night hike. I set off at around 8 p.m., sad girl music in my earbuds and a camelback with water and supplies. I didn't plan to be out too long, but I was definitely going to be out a while. The hike started off great, and the fog was almost sort of a novelty, very eerie and calm in a neat sort of way. The only sounds came from water dripping off the plants along the mountainside. Nobody was around, and it felt like I had the mountains to myself. I was hiking without using my flashlight, as it was like driving. High beams of light cut my visibility from about 20 feet to just 10 feet. Shining the light would be like facing a wall of whiteness, and it would kill my night vision. After about an hour, things started getting weird. I was maybe 2.5 miles up the trail, and the only light came from the glow of the city behind me. It was getting darker the farther I got up and into the mountains. I started smelling something synthetic. First, it was perfume for a few seconds. Just a whiff. I couldn't see more than 15 feet or so in front of me at that point, so I was kind of like, that was kind of odd. The second smell was that of campfire, which was also odd as there weren't any campgrounds nearby. I shrugged it off and kept going. I then got a whiff of a plant that brought me back to my childhood, as it reminded me of smelling it during summers when I would play outside with my friends. I wasn't too off-put, but it was indeed a bit strange. A bit later, I noticed a dull flash out of the corner of my eye. It was light coming from a flashlight, but it was above me on the ridge, maybe 50 to 100 feet up. Looked like a glow in the clouds, sort of like how a plane looks flying through a cloud. It would get brighter, dimmer based on direction. To my knowledge, though, there weren't any trails there. Super weird. I took my earbuds out and listened. Still silence except for the light. The light would turn on, sweep, turn off, then turn on and shine in a different direction, like someone looking for something. I assumed they were having the same visibility problems I was. I had stopped completely and watched as the light would continue to turn on and off and move slowly along the ridge. I kept my earbuds out now, and I was just telling myself it was another hiker. I waited for it to pass above me and kept on. After maybe 10 minutes, I heard whistling, sort of like someone calling a dog, but from a distance. I looked back, and while I was unable to orient myself due to the fog, the whistling was coming from the light that I could now see was across the canyon I had been walking along. In terms of distance, it was probably about 1/6 of a mile, just a faint glow through the fog. I watched it for a minute, then kept moving. After maybe another hour and a half, I stopped for some water. The trail had turned from dirt to this sandy, crunchy soil. It had only gotten darker, and I was around 3,200 feet in elevation, so the city lights were not as bright anymore. I noted that my footsteps were the loudest thing out here, which was a bit unsettling. The trail twists and turns along the mountainsides, and there would be these scenic viewpoints at the turns that would give you maybe 50 feet or so to go off trail and look over the edge into the valley. I was about 4.5 miles out at this time, tracking with my watch. So I went out to the edge of the closest view to assess if I wanted to keep going or not. I felt great, energy fatigue-wise, and although my cell service had been spotty, I was trying to look at sat maps to see what was ahead of me and maybe pick a turnaround point. I was also getting texts now that hadn't been able to deliver since my service was in and out, so I wanted to check those too. I'm at the edge of the view, and someone had made a little rock sculpture thing with a weird stick. I took a picture of it. I was just chilling out there for maybe 2 minutes or so and looking at the sculpture. I can't see the trail because of the fog and darkness, but I know where it is based on direction. Here's where it gets absolutely terrifying. I pull out my phone to check my texts one last time before setting off, and as soon as I look down at my phone, I hear 5 very fast footsteps from the direction of the trail. This was the sound that my feet made because of the soil, and I recognized it immediately. I instantly looked in that direction, and they stopped completely. Now it was only silence. I scrambled to get my flashlight and knife out of my bag versus using my phone light and fists and shined in that direction. A wall of fog and silence. The footsteps were not a gallop or the skittering of an animal. It was the footsteps of something running at me on 2 legs that stopped on a dime. I could feel the terror rising in my chest as I stood there frozen. I was alone, in the dark, up in the mountains, and something was up here with me. I'm getting goosebumps just reliving this. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes with the light facing that direction. The biggest problem was that they came from the direction of the trail that I needed to go to get back. I thought, screw this, I'm heading back. I slowly approached the trail and walked through where the sound came from and began to head back down. For maybe the next 20 minutes, every 2 minutes or so, I would quickly stop and shine the light behind me. I could have sworn maybe 2 or 3 times I heard an extra step in the distance behind me, like something was matching my footfalls to remain undetected. I was fast walking now as the visibility was still too poor to run, and I was worried I'd twist an ankle. I kept my light on the whole time and had my knife out in my other hand. After maybe 30 minutes or so, I heard something crash through the brush on my right, which was the steep side of a canyon. Again, I cannot see anything because of the fog. I moved to the other side of the trail and kept going. Let me tell you, that was the most determined I've been to make it down a trail. I heard other weird sounds along the way, but I ignored them and kept moving. I will never forget that night. I night hiked one more time on the same trail, but it was clear I had a headlamp on the whole time and a much bigger knife on my side. I also ran back down when I reached my turnaround point. I'm not sure I'll have more night hikes in my future.
Next, in the early 80s, an avid hunter residing in a small town near the southwest part of the Chattahoochee National Forest experienced a chilling encounter during a late afternoon hunt around the Coopers Creek Recreation Area.
In the early 1980s, I lived in a small town near the southwest part of the Chattahoochee National Forest in Georgia. I was hunting on public land in the National Forest, just up the road from home in an area known as Coopers Creek. I've hunted in and around that area for years and was very familiar with the terrain. When I located a good spot that I thought would give me a good chance at a large buck, I set up my lock-on tree stand about 12 feet off the ground. I was hunting with a 12-gauge shotgun, since rifle hunting is not allowed in this area. So fast forward to early November. I had been hunting in my tree stand several times. This particular hunt was during the late afternoon around 4:15 p.m. I wanted to get there earlier, but I was held up at work. This was a Friday afternoon, and my wife knew that I would not be home until 8:30 p.m., and even later if I had bagged a deer. I parked my truck at the trailhead and started hiking into the woods to my tree stand. The walk would take about 20 minutes, moving slowly through the woods since I didn't want to spook any of the wildlife. As I was walking, I noticed how quiet it was, eerily quiet. I finally arrived, climbed up, and settled in. I began to survey my surroundings and began to have a disconcerting feeling like somebody was watching me. I just felt like something was out of place. After a while, I kept looking at my watch, wondering how much time I had left until dusk. I thought that I should leave early because of how I was feeling. Then I caught movement to my right side. I slowly turned my head and began looking through the tree canopy. That's when I saw it. I honestly don't know what it was. I was staring into the trees and I saw what looked like a large human body, but it was completely blurred. It was moving through the trees. I could clearly see the outline of the figure, but the rest was all blurry. I couldn't focus on it. It resembled an out-of-focus blob of gelatin that was in the shape of a human. Whenever it would stop moving, I completely lost sight of it as it blended into its surroundings. I continued to watch it stop and then start moving. I do so for about 15 minutes. By that time, I was starting to become scared as I was thinking about my walk back to the truck. So I waited for another 15 minutes or so. It was getting dark by then, so I slowly climbed out of my stand. Once I hit the solid ground, I wasted no time. I sprinted all the way back to my truck and quickly jumped into the cab. I just sat there in my truck and tried to regain my breath. I drove home and said nothing to my wife or anybody else for several weeks. During that time, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing. I eventually told my wife one night. She listened and said that it was probably my imagination. I later told my brother, who said something similar to my wife. I never told anyone else, and I never hunted in those woods again. I didn't even go back for the tree stand. I took a break from hunting for about 5 years. I then started up again, but never in that area. I still wonder what I saw that day. I have no rational explanation. Years later, I think in 1988, the movie Predator was released. When I saw the cloaked alien on the screen, I immediately tensed up in fear. I was shocked because that is exactly what I saw. Did I encounter an alien? I still wonder what it was that I saw that day. Unfortunately, I no longer hunt or spend much time in the woods.
For our final story of the evening, we're headed deep into the heart of the Bankhead National Forest, where a solo camper confronts a mysterious group of creatures.
I lived in the southeastern United States for most of my life, and I've had several encounters with things I could not explain. Some terrifying and some just bizarre, but the one that sticks with me the most is from Northwest Alabama. This happened in the winter of 2006. I moved back to Alabama after living and working in Atlanta, Georgia for a couple of years. The time I spent in the big city was very stressful, so when I moved back, I spent weekends camping and hiking just to enjoy nature and decompress. The area in which the encounter happened was very familiar to me. I had hiked and camped there many times off and on for nearly 10 years. On one camping trip, in late December or early January, I decided to hike and camp in Bankhead National Forest. That day was unseasonably cold, and I did not expect many, if any, other campers there. Just as I had thought, I reached the trailhead, and there was not a soul in sight. There were no cars, nothing. Perfect. I hiked to a good camp spot about a mile or so down the trail that was next to a running creek. It was late in the evening and nearly dusk by the time I'd finished setting up my tent and collecting firewood for the night. It was just after I got a small campfire going when I heard 2 very loud tree knocks coming from the other side of the creek. It sounded like a Louisville slugger being swung against a tree at full force. A very distinct sound. My camp was about 60 feet or so from the creek, and the sound was from quite far away across the creek. I didn't think much of it at first. After maybe an hour had passed, I heard the same knocks again, this time much closer. Keep in mind, this was a time when all the Bigfoot shows were popular and you had fanatics out in the woods all over the country trying to call up a Sasquatch, so I ignored it and I figured someone was out there trying to have fun. To each their own. Anyway, if it was someone, I doubt they would even know I was there. Again, I was alone, and I didn't play music or anything when I camped. The only way you would know I was there is if someone saw the light from my small campfire. Some more time passed, then I started hearing very large tree branches snapping, now even closer than the last knocks that I heard. This got my attention, but I thought about it for a while and said to myself, it is possible that a few people together could break a large enough branch to make that sound. But I was beginning to get somewhat annoyed that they might be directing it at me. I always traveled armed with a handgun and was comfortable dealing with confrontation. I thought if it was a group of people out there targeting me, they must not be very smart. It's not very wise to mess with a stranger while he is alone in the middle of nowhere. I continued to mind my business, stayed quiet, and hoped that if I didn't respond, they would just go away. After more time had passed, I was still sitting by the fire relaxing when out of nowhere a feeling of dread came over me. A sense of danger washed over me and I began to feel my pulse increase rapidly. I've had this feeling before from previous outings in the forest, but this felt much more serious and alarming. I decided that if there was a crazy person or people out there, I was not going to give up my position. so I decided to douse my campfire and quickly retreat to my tent. Those were my intentions anyway. As soon as I stood up, I heard the loudest scream I've ever heard. It was very close, perhaps just from the other side of the creek. The sound removed all doubt that I might be dealing with a human. Whatever or whoever made that noise had to have been huge. I didn't bother putting the fire out. I quickly got in my tent, zipped it up, and sat there remaining quiet while holding my pistol and training my ears to listen for any outside noises. This area is mainly huge oak trees, and everywhere on the ground was a thick layer of dried leaves, so I was confident that whatever this thing was, I would at least be able to hear it coming. The leaves on the ground made it sound like even if a squirrel was hopping around, it would sound like an elephant walking. For the next half hour or so, I would hear deep grunts and what sounded like gibberish coming from the other side of the creek. But the sound was coming from the same spot, not moving, which was a small relief for me. I'm still in my tent, not making a sound, and still clenching the pistol in my now trembling hand. Then I heard what I knew to be a large rock hit the water in the middle of the creek. It was not a muskrat splashing around, nor a beaver slapping its tail. It was a loud kerplunk. There were some more grunts, then another rock hitting the water. This time, it splashed closer to the bank on my side of the creek. At this point, things were getting serious. I was just about to yell out for this thing to stop when I heard another rock being thrown. It did not hit the water. It hit the soft, sandy ground and rolled between my fire and my tent. I did not see it, but judging by the sound, it had to be a bowling ball-sized stone. I wondered what kind of strength it would take to hurl a large rock nearly 100 feet. It was then that I shouted out, "Okay, I understand you don't want me here. Just please leave me alone, and I'll leave as soon as the sun comes up." A couple minutes passed, and then I started hearing footsteps from across the creek moving through the leaves away from me. I let out a sigh of relief that only lasted for a moment. Next, I heard footsteps from all around my tent steadily walking away. I was horrified to realize that while this thing on the other side of the creek had my utmost attention, its buddies were closing in on me and had me surrounded. I sat there scared to death and listened as to what I guessed to have been 4 or 5 of these things walking away from my tent. They were no longer bothering to be quiet. I sat and listened until I could barely make out the last footstep in the thick leaves. I sat up the rest of the night, and in the blue of the morning, well before sunrise, I gathered my stuff, packed my tent, and briskly walked the mile back to my parked truck. During the long drive home, I thought about what happened and came to the conclusion that if one of these beings wanted to kill me, they could have easily. They might not have meant any harm to me, but they damn sure know how to scare the hell out of a fella.
And that's all for tonight, dear listeners. We'll be talking again in 6 short weeks, unless that is you become a Patreon member, where during that 6-week break, I'll be releasing at least 2 bonus episodes. Until next time, I'll be leaving you in the dark where whispers linger and shadows dance. Stay wary, sleep well, and beware the whispers in the night. If you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. You can follow us anywhere on social media at campfirecultpod and online at campfirecultpod.com. And finally, if you don't mind, please rate and review wherever possible.